thank Eagle Forum for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Phyllis Schlafly is, as a role model personally, having all of those kids and doing the sorts of things that we do is right up my alley. So what a wonderful fit for me. 2 generations ago, William F. Buckley catalyzed the modern conservative movement with his best-selling book, God and Man at Yale. It described deep ideological corruption within this prestigious U.S. university that educates America's top leaders. In the 68 years since, a conservative cottage industry has ceaselessly generated best-selling books, articles, and even documentaries about similar corruption in U.S. education. One of the easiest ways to go viral at a conservative outlet is to publicize the latest crazy thing that American education institutions are doing. Major voices like Rush Limbaugh and Tucker Carlson do regular segments about it, and during which I am sure that their millions of listeners and viewers are shaking their heads and clucking their tongues. But none of this agitation for 2 generations has yet led to any effective reform of American public education institutions. The right's record of success on education issues is abysmal in this past century, which is killing us demographically. Each new American generation learns less and is indoctrinated more. Only 1 in 5 Americans younger than age 45 can pass the basic civics exam that is required for foreign citizens who wish to become Americans. That's 1 in 5. School choice is currently limited to less than 1 in 10 American kids, and overregulated by government nannies to erase what makes choice schools different from government-assigned schools. Election tipping percentages of my generation support socialism. For generations, Republican politicians have at best done nothing significant about American education's rot, and at worst, they have helped accelerate it. Here are 4 words that prove it. No child left behind. Right. Here are 2 more. Common Core. The failure of our representatives for generations now to truly address serious and worsening social problems is a key reason those of us on the right are experiencing wilderness years. That's a period of questioning and unrest typical for a party that has lost a big election. While we haven't been politically curb-stomped lately, it feels like we constantly lose because when the politicians we elect gain power, they don't deliver like the other side's politicians do. Right. Of course, there are many reasons for this. I'd like to discuss several. We on the right need to agree on 3 key truths. First, the old ways of political engagement are no longer effective because the kind of government we have is not the kind we wish we had. Second, we are not currently in a time of neutrality, bipartisanship, and win-win politics. Thirdly, the right has completely lost public education, public institutions, chief among them the education institutions, and this is an existential threat to our deepest loves. The right's lack of attention to education and family life is a key reason that we have lost the culture. A congressman said to me a few months ago, the left puts their A team on the education committees. Republicans put their B or their C team on the education committees. Which strategy do you think has worked better? The left's focus on education has clearly tilted the electorate in their favor. That's why we must start meeting them on this battlefield with fierce attention and redirected resources, or no matter how many judges we get appointed, we will lose the American people. Once we lose the American people, we lose America. And time is getting short. Each generation reads less, knows less, and governs itself less. Hate cliques and DC discussions are not even remotely going to fix this. We need to massively move money, institutions, action, and power yesterday. Part of the reason that we haven't is that the kind of government we have is not the kind many Americans think we have. We too often still assume that what should be taught in Civics 101. America is government of the people, by the people, for the people. We have 3 branches of government, each supposed to check each other, with limited powers and responsibilities. Elected representatives work for us, not the other way around. To add one specific to education, we pretend that schools are at least locally controlled. None of these is true today. Progressives and their descendants have put major caveats into the system of government that America's founders established, caveats that in some cases completely erase the founders' style of government. This first began dawning upon me with a deep intuitive understanding when I researched Common Core in depth before other national reporters were robustly investigating this national takeover of public education with almost no new laws passed. The mothers and fathers I was interviewing couldn't figure out how Common Core could happen to their kids in schools. Isn't the United States the country of the people, by the people, for the people? No, it is not. The vast majority of rules that we Americans follow are not laws, but regulations written by unelected bureaucrats. We do not live under government by consent of the governed. In Common Core, Obamacare, and in fact, the majority of what the federal government does today, Americans are outraged to find what government can do to their families with their money and without their consent. But we have been unable to stop it, despite our vigorous exercise of our rights to assemble, to free speech, to petition our government, and to vote. Remember the Tea Party? We show up, we wave signs, we call our representatives, we flood public meetings, and we get nothing. I describe this dynamic fully as it regards education in my book, Education Invasion. And the same thing right now is happening in schools, letting boys compete with girls in sports and indoctrinating kids as young as preschoolers with transgender ideology. Just last week, I had to tell a mother whose public school contributed to her 13-year-old daughter's identification with transgenderism that I have never in the last decade seen parents fight the government school system and win. Even temporary victories are rare. Long-term ones don't exist. Citizens feeling like their government doesn't listen to them directly fueled Donald Trump's presidency. The bureaucracy and its fellow travelers who specialize in government without consent are not surprisingly President Trump's arch nemesis. Some call them the deep state. Wonks call it the administrative state. Whatever you call it, it eliminates representative government. Our bureaucracy has grown to such a size and power that it thinks it can even attempt a coup. The people who are supposed to protect us from this, Congress, twiddle their thumbs while going on TV and in congressional hearings to rant about the problems while doing not a thing about it. It is time for our leaders and representatives to make total political war on this unaccountable fourth branch of government in every way possible. In his book, By the People, the eminent social scientist Charles Murray makes the case for prudent civil disobedience. The left has their resistance, we need ours. The difference between the two must be that their resistance foments lawlessness, while ours must be a call, like the civil rights call, to obey a higher law instead of the laws of men, the laws of nature and of nature's God, as the Declaration of Independence says. We must exercise our rights freely and stop asking permission to do so. In education, this might look like starting new schools and school systems and employing teachers based 100% on their quality, not state-fabricated credentials. In law, it would look like providing as much freedom as possible to private schools, home schools, charter schools, and startup schools, and removing time-wasting bureaucratic burdens to let people privately solve their own problems. To the extent possible, we should work through the system and demand that our representatives make it work better for us, such as leveraging Congress to pass the A+ Act that would let states get their school money without federal strings. But when that is not possible, we should ignore bureaucratic demands that infringe on our natural rights and endanger our children's future. We need people with money to put it behind developing parallel systems to the government's failed ones and protecting our forms of protest, just like the ACLU springs anti-Trump rioters out of jail after paying their bail. Unless you are a big donor, calling up your congressman is no longer going to have much effect. Getting onto the local school board is only going to establish you as a functionary in a federal outpost. The old ways of political protest and engagement are no longer effective, especially long-term. We need new ways of organizing and a more transactional relationship with politicians that more accurately reflects that they don't work for us. President Trump has experimented with this, and we need to do more. I suggest going to public meetings, especially of your local school board, state board of education, and your state legislature's education committees, then posting on YouTube and Facebook the videos of public officials responding to you asking, what are you going to do to protect little girls from boys' genitals in their school showers and their bathrooms? Get all your friends to agree to share it all over social media. It only takes a minute. As the left has shown, social pressure is far more effective now than traditional political organizing. We need to try more of it. Another way is to go with a friend if you can, as you did yesterday, for a scheduled meeting with a local official to face about one specific issue. Keep it short, sweet, well-reasoned, and focused. This should be especially effective for women speaking on sensitive social issues like religious liberty and transgendered schools. You can also call up all the public schools in your town to ask whether they allow boys on the girls' bathrooms and on girls' sports teams. This is how I learned that my red city in a red Midwestern state has transgender bathrooms, just like all the blue cities and blue states do. I could hardly get my kids swimming lessons this summer because nearly all of the public and private pools in my town, Republican-led town, let men into my 7-year-old daughter's dressing room. My Republican representatives dodge all questions about this and then continue to send me mailers about how I should vote for them because they're increasing taxpayer funding for the public schools that are pushing this insane agenda. We need to start demanding that politicians earn trust by delivering on our political priorities. We can tell the difference between a dozen show votes to defund Planned Parenthood when Republicans are out of power and the lack of fully defunding it when Republicans hold power. Right. Republicans need to hear that we are not buying their speeches and op-eds when they're not backed by effective actions. And we want votes like this on the record for everyone to see. Republicans who keep playing this old boys club game need to be primaried. Secondly, we are not currently in a time of neutrality, bipartisanship, and win-win politics. The left has forced the nation into a zero-sum game where for them to win, everyone else must lose. We must respond accordingly. Think of the women's bathrooms, Catholic foster agencies banned from helping parentless children in Philadelphia and other cities, and the outright Marxist school curriculum that has infected the entire U.S. education system. The left will not accommodate us. They have made it clear that they intend to crush us. One side will win, and the other side will lose. This is because secularism is not neutral. It is a competing religion that allows for no compromise between it and any other faith, such as Christianity. This is why secular public schools are so successful at taking Christian kids and making them agnostics and atheists. If it has to be us versus them, I want my family and church to win. Not just because my family belongs to me, but because our way of life is objectively better, happier, and more satisfying, and is best for the nation. The way that we fight politically need not and should not be how we express itself in person towards people with different politics. By all means, speak gently and winsomely when you are one-on-one and in person. But in public, as one mass versus another mass, we have to shoot for unconditional victory. Our strategy must be the same as Ronald Reagan's against Russia during the Cold War. We win, they lose. Pretending that it is possible for public libraries, public schools, public universities, and other public institutions and venues to be neutral about paganism versus religion and the natural rights-based form of American government that stems directly from Christianity is a fool's errand. This may have been plausible in the 1950s, but it is not any longer. Secularism is not religiously or politically neutral. Let me repeat that. Secularism is not religiously or politically neutral. It is not a victory for schools to be able to offer one measly prayer sometimes at a graduation ceremony or outside at the flagpole once a year before school. The children engaging in these activities are not anywhere close to being formed in a Christian or self-governing way of life. Having a Christian club after school as a counterpart to the gay-straight alliance is just putting makeup on a corpse. American children deserve better than this. They deserve access to schools that are fully responsive to their parents through real school choice. If government won't give parents school choice, their families and churches should self-fund it. What is true of religion is also true of politics. It is not a victory to put a handful of decent books on a state curriculum approval list next to Howard Zinn's Marxist propagandizing a people's history of the United States. It is not a victory to replace Common Core with essentially the same thing fed through a thesaurus app to produce cosmetic changes, as my state, Indiana, did under a fully aware then Governor Mike Pence. It is not a victory to use the only Republican majorities in Congress and the presidency in a generation to cut taxes for the big businesses that fuel cultural Marxism and pressure our governments to obey LGBT activists who will never vote Republican. There is no moral equivalence between drag queens teaching small children to perform sexual dances in public libraries and holding a spelling contest or open mic poetry night. These two uses of public institutions are not morally equal, and they should not be considered equally legally either. This should not be a hard argument to make, yet somehow many of the right's thinkers cannot or will not make it. It is past time to start making openly morality-based arguments for our positions instead of measly, unpersuasive process arguments. If we are to be forced to make hard choices between supporting religion and supporting secularism, and it appears that we are, we clearly must stand up and choose to support religion as the only sane path forward. Neutrality and compromise are over because both sides' philosophies are irreconcilable. They believe reading the Bible in school is evil. We believe not reading the Bible in school is a great way to make sure our kids lose their faith, which is to say, evil. This unbridgeable moral divide is the real reason the left's activists want to make sure my family and yours cannot live in peace and safety. Gay writer Carlos Maza, for example, incited violence against his political opposition on Twitter in the form of public harassment and milkshake throwing. Not only did he get support from Twitter itself, but he continues to be employed by Vox and given platforms, giant public platforms like TED Talks. Even more extreme versions of this are Antifa and other left activists, like several of the recent mass shooters. President Trump is a corrective to a political party and a movement that lacks the courage to defend its own constituents, voters, and families. It is time to relearn how to assert the goodness and needed dominance of our rights and way of life rather than hiding under a rock and hoping the storm will go away. It will not go away. Merely withdrawing from public engagement will doom us in the long run, because the majority of kids in secular public schools learning that religion is bigoted will soon be voting whether you get to keep your First Amendment rights to exercise religion. The political right has a reasonably good defense, appointing a smaller ratio of insane judges than Democrats do, stopping horrific legislation from getting passed sometimes while a minority party, but we do not have a good offense. Winning requires making touchdowns, not just holding the other team indefinitely at the 1-yard line. We need to think and act both defensively and offensively, solving problems ourselves as much as possible and demanding that our politicians make more local problem solving possible by reducing government power. We must protect our kids while demanding that government stop favoring the left in the culture wars and start bringing home the education dollar bacon for those who want freedom. And through the boycott, divestment, and sanction of culturally Marxist institutions and looting their subsidies for tax cuts and school choice for families. Thirdly, perhaps the biggest hard truth that is time for us to acknowledge is that the right has completely lost public institutions, including public schools and universities. Except for a few isolated cases, reform from within is no longer possible. It is rarely effective anyway, as evidenced by research on failed businesses and other failed institutions. As a whole, American education institutions are corrupted beyond repair. Local control is dead. We can't reverse the processes that killed local control, but we can build new institutions, escape valves, and workarounds that will enable the development of a new system that will remain standing when the other one collapses under its own weight. As we do so, we need to be vigilant about attempts to co-opt them through the into the old bloated system, such as through government regulations on voucher programs. Americans are heavily invested in the current system. We would like to believe that public institutions of our childhood are available to our kids in better form, but they simply are not. Lying to ourselves about this reality is only going to hurt our kids and grandkids. We owe it to them to see that our public institutions the way that they are, not as they used to be or as we wish that they could be.
Today, public schools are outposts and a funding source for the unelected fourth branch of government, fully captured by hard-left special interests who will not loose their grip even if laws try to compel them. Public schools are the local storefronts of a giant nationwide syndicate controlled by special interests in Washington. A big proof of this is that we still have Common Core and transgender school bathrooms. There has been not one instance of successful resistance to either one, not one, through the standard political process. Former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels couldn't even get Howard Zinn's plagiarized, communist propaganda preaching, best-selling, so-called history textbook out of public schools. We're talking about a poisonous, America-hating book that even leftist historians agree is academic garbage. An official in the school district where the Parkland mass shooting recently occurred told parents the district cannot change policies that kept the shooter from having a criminal record, which would have helped keep him from getting any guns, because of federal pressure that enables potential lawsuits from the American Civil Liberties Union, the Human Rights Campaign, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, all of our best friends. Public schools are stuck in a web of strangling regulations that endanger children, and they cannot get themselves out. So if you're thinking that if we can just get enough angry parents or just enough lawmakers to agree or a favorable court decision, then we can maybe someday finally win, just stop. Working through the existing system is most likely to mean people spending years working their hearts out all for nothing, just like parent activists did over Common Core. It is time to switch to tactics that fit our political and social reality. The other alternative is another lost generation, and our nation cannot survive that. If you need more proof of this, read my book, and then ask yourself, if Common Core could happen this way, what else could not? Would a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren administration refrain from using the U.S. Department of Education's power to tell every school in the nation what they must teach and what they must spend for it all? You cannot answer no, because that is exactly what President Obama did. And Congress, controlled by Republicans, not only issued that power to Obama, but rubber-stamped that way of governance when it updated No Child Left Behind just a few years later. Do you think that the current crop of Democrat presidential candidates would not use the power of the federal government to go farther than President Obama's executive order, forcing public schools to allow boys into girls' showers? Do you really think Congress will stop it? Do you think it's okay to keep leaving the nation's kids, the next generation's voters, as guinea pigs for leftist, diabolical, centrally planned schemes? No, it's not. It's time to give parents the exact same power that the federal government has now, of being able to tell their schools what to do, backed up with the power to take their kids' education dollars to any school they want. That's one thing you and I can do about all this. Here are some more ideas, and there are additional ones in the handout that I sent to the folks to put on the conference website. So Charles Murray wants to make government an insurable hazard. I think we should also make most of what it does obsolete. Government must be made to compete with fully private initiatives that aim to ultimately replace all of its unconstitutional functions. To achieve that, we need 2 dual strategies, meaning 4 total. So here's dual strategy number 1. We need both a defense and an offense on education. The right has effectively deployed neither offense nor defense on education in the last century. I'll use a model that the Manhattan Institute's Aaron Wrenn developed. It modifies the classic framework for reforming failing institutions from economist A.O. Hirschman. So Hirschman says the 2 ways that individuals can fix an institution that isn't working are called voice and exit. They can either complain or they can leave, or use some combination of the 2, maybe complaining to leave, threatening to leave. Public schools' monopoly on taxpayer funds makes it extremely difficult for families to leave. According to EdChoice polling, almost half, a plurality of American parents' top choice for their kids would be a private school, but only about 15% of American parents actually use private education. This helps explain why American education has been so impervious to reform. It's hard to exit, so people's only other viable strategy is voice. But as I've noted, both exit and voice are logjam due to the bureaucracy. No wonder American kids' achievement hasn't improved in the past 50 years, even as indoctrination has exploded. So to exit and voice, which are both defensive strategies, we need to add 2 offensive strategies. Those are called capture or replace and destroy or delegitimize. For example, we should insist that Congress and state legislatures pass laws that include all reform pathways. They must make it easier for people to leave any institution that doesn't work for them, give them a way to make their criticism heard and acted on, destroy the worst of these institutions, and, lastly, help private individuals replace them. We must also demand self-government loopholes that eliminate as many regulations as possible, cut funds to government-run institutions, and allow parents to exit easily through things like education savings accounts. We can and should employ all of these strategies outside of government, individually and within our community. So if government won't act, Obama with his pen and a phone, oh, Congress won't act, so I will. Well, we should say the same thing. Congress won't act, so I will. Mostly the right has focused on these voice things, going to school board meetings, holding public rallies, and the like. So I've been arguing that doesn't work well right now. So instead, we need to make exit possible and more likely for more people to leave failing and left-captured institutions. Donors should also diversify their giving portfolio so they're not only focusing on the currently ineffective voice option, but also supporting strategies to exit, capture, and replace public schools. We all also need to scrutinize politicians and organizations for their track record of success at solving actual problems on the ground, rather than their ability to emotionally manipulate us. Today's era of declining trust and honesty demands that we start requiring people to prove their assertions before we believe them and give them our money and kids. No more trust but verify. Instead, we must say, prove it and then I'll believe you. You're an expert in education? Prove it. How many kids have you and your schools taught to read competently? How many kids with broken homes have you helped become emotionally stable? How many children love America and understand its principles because of your work? Right now, not very many. The second and related dual strategy that we need both national and local action. The right theoretically believes in subsidiarity and self-government, but we have been practically terrible at living it. We focus much of our time, money, and energy far too much on national organizations and initiatives which have a lower probability of success and long-term effectiveness, and far too little on local action, which has a much higher probability of success and longevity. We need to right this imbalance. National organizations like Eagle Forum and the Heritage Foundation are great, but they cannot sustain the entire weight of social change. We need them to perform sentinels on the wall functions, alerting citizens when to flood Congress with phone calls and emails, and informing us of good arguments to use in the public square and of politicians' choices through voting scorecards. Their job is to man the defenses, and they are good at it. But you cannot have a city entirely made out of sentinels on the wall. In fact, you don't even have a city if you only have sentinels on the wall. The sentinels need something to defend. That is a certain daily way of life, an entire ecosystem of Edmund Burke's little platoons of families, churches, and local organizations that address local problems locally. This means that everyone on our side needs to start being the change. To counteract the culture of elite hypocrisy ruining our kids' futures, we have to show integrity by living our principles rather than, like the left, resorting to government force to make others do what we think is right. This means, for example, if you support school choice, actively choosing a non-government school for your children and grandchildren, and making it possible for other people to choose the school they really want through your charitable donations. Schools of choice are not only cheaper because they protect your child's innocence, but also because they free you from having to pay tuition through property taxes in an expensive school district. A truly conservative strategy must focus on rebuilding locally. Many Americans, including the silent middle, are beginning to realize what leftist dominance of children's upbringing means for this country. People are coming to understand that the America that made it possible for them to live in such comfort and freedom will not exist for future generations unless we mobilize now. If enough people who have resources begin to willingly use them for the greater good, then the country's coming financial implosion might do it for us, but with a lot more suffering. We all know that the United States is a fiscal house of cards. Our politicians have willfully blinded themselves to this, but they won't be able to pretend for much longer. Now is the time to prepare for a grim politics, a decade away at most, that will make today's age of Trump look like a grand old party. Starting with Medicare's projected insolvency in 8 years, the United States old age entitlement promises will begin to go belly up, and it will become rapidly clear that there is simply no money to pay them. Everything not nailed down is already mortgaged. On top of this, Americans are having fewer kids, which is already leading to declining enrollments in education institutions at all levels. A wave of closures is soon to come upon us. This crisis is an opportunity to transition to a completely new system of educating kids that works for the best interests of the country. When there is truly not one more red cent or pretense of a future cent to be found in state and federal budgets, then the financial savings to be had from school choice and bureaucracy slashing will be much more attractive to politicians who don't care about, how government schools are destroying kids' souls, not to mention their tax-paying capacity. In that day, will there be schools of choice capable of operating excellently on shoestring budgets, waiting to receive these government-abandoned kids? And who will have started building them 8 years beforehand? We need arcs for people to climb into when the floodwaters rise. We have right now what the spiritual thriller author Frank Peretti called one more season of restraint, a calm before the storm, some years of plenty, we do not know how many, that wise people will use to prepare for the coming years of famine. I'm preparing as best as I can, and for the love of kids and country, I ask you to join me.